Are we safe?
I don't know. The clock is ticking. We are going to find a solution. We are going to make it right.
You don't want to just crush him?
Hide that. The four of us will face the danger. We will protect you.
Family. It's about connecting to something bigger than yourself. We'll face it together. As a family.
Just want to say thanks very much, Jess, and congratulations on Marvel, on Fantastic Four First Steps. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you a round of applause.
Thanks.
What's it like watching a film that you've shot on a big screen, on an enormous screen like that?
I mean, the truth is I'd seen so much of it by the time I was finished with the movie that I'd done watching it. But it's been a little while now, and it's really nice to sit on the IMAX screen. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank IMAX for letting us do this and for supporting this, and the other sponsors as well.
And here in the Science Museum as well.
It seems very appropriate to be here. And this was actually the theatre that we came to do our tests. I came to view my tests here. The first round of tests we did in LA at Playa Vista at the IMAX HQ, but once we got to London and started pre-production, when I was trying to figure out how to shoot an 800-foot space god, Galactus, in IMAX, this is where we did our lens tests and we came and watched them. So it's very nice to be here in this theatre. It feels appropriate.
I must say, a couple of times during the film, I looked over at you and saw you smiling, and it was a really nice thing to see.
Right.
Enjoying the film. I've got to say, congratulations on it. It is, yes, it's a superhero film, but it feels different. It has a unique look, and in a sort of a crowded world of superhero stories, I think it's an amazing achievement to have something which stands out and feels different.
Thank you.
So yeah, well done. I love the sort of retrofuturism. I love how it doesn't look like it's shot in the 60s, but it feels of a different time.
Yeah.
And that's through the shooting, the production design, everything all works together so fantastically.
Yeah.
So yeah, well done. Well
Thank
done.
you.
I am going to ask you. That's what I was going to ask you. I just want to have a little bit of background on you as a cinematographer, and just understand your history and your career. So can you give me a little?
Yeah, I mean, my career really has been sort of kind of shoot by any means necessary. I think, coming out of film school, I just kind of, even before I left film school, I got my first job working with the choreographer William Forsyth, shooting a documentary for the BBC, which we shot on 16mm, and he'd seen a little short film that I'd made on the Brazilian martial art capoeira, which had made its way to the Cinémathèque Française in Paris, and he was looking for collaborators to make a short film as part of a sort of longer documentary that he was doing with the BBC, and he said, I want this guy to film my short. And so I hadn't actually left film school, and I was there filming one of the greatest contemporary choreographers, William Forsyth. I learned a lot from him. He was a big mentor. But then coming out, I shot music videos, I shot more documentary, I shot short films, I shot commercials. I finally kind of got a movie, a script that I actually wanted to make. And that was not a tiny film, actually. That was Stander. Mm-hmm. It was a 1970s apartheid period film about a true story about a cop in apartheid South Africa. Felt like a great script, a great project. I kind of connected with the director in a sort of roundabout way. She'd actually seen the day for night sequence that I'd shot in a commercial. And she was like, I've got a whole sequence in my movie that I want to do like that. And you did this so well. And we just kind of got talking. And so that was a great break. And then, I was working independent film. Shot Son of Rambo with a bunch of my film school mates, Garth Jennings, Nick Goldsmith, our editor.
A film which I love, which I think is absolutely fantastic.
The entire team pretty much came out of our film school, and it was kind of like we were just doing what we'd always done, and it was the same as music videos. It was a very creative time for music videos, so we just sort of carried on what we were doing, and the scale got bigger. And then of course, Hot Fuzz with Edgar was a big break for me. So having seen Standard, which was a cop movie, I think he connected, that to Hot Fuzz, and we made that, and that kind of got a lot of attention. So
like I said to you on the phone a couple of days ago that Hot Fuzz is one of my favourite films of all time, and I realised this is the third time I've seen Fantastic Four. I sort of, as I was watching, I was like, oh wait, I can see the parallel, I can see the line from Hot Fuzz to Fantastic Four. I can see the little moments, I can see that sort of fun cinematography.
Yeah.
Hot Fuzz is a film which I've referenced hundreds and hundreds of times. So yes, thrilled to be talking to you about anything. But I don't want to dwell on Hot Fuzz.
Well, yeah. So I think the interesting thing about that movie was it was very ambitious. Edgar's a hugely talented director, and he had a vast array of references, and so we punched above our weight in a way for a kind of action comedy of that scale, and that kind of got a lot of attention. And then I'd always sort of looked at the careers of cinematographers that I really admired, and I saw a great diversity in the body of work, and I think I was very conscious about that in the projects that I chose, and so then I went and made a couple of English period movies, which was completely different. And yeah, it's just been choosing projects one after another, or you don't always get the ideal choice, but trying to do things that you see a nugget of something that you really feel like you can do something special with and unique with, and kind of going with that and trying to make every film special and different.
Yep.
And kind of recreate the language, really, which is the part that I find really fascinating.
So from small independent UK films to enormous, Marvel superhero movies.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's brilliant. What a journey.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. Yeah.
Tell me about getting the job. Tell me about how. I'm as a DOP myself. The excitement of getting a phone call for a meeting for a job is a thrill, and then doing the meetings and going through that process. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me how you first knew about the job.
Well, I was in Budapest, and I got a call from my agent saying, Marvel want you to do a conversation about this project, and they're starting to think about doing streaming. They'd never made television, as a studio before. Although some of the IP had been done as television shows, they hadn't done streaming on that scale, and so it was kind of an interesting proposition. I'd got into the Marvel universe really because of my son, who was obsessed with that, and so I actually had seen a lot of the films because we'd go together. So I had a kind of interest and a curiosity about it, but I didn't necessarily think it was kind of my thing. And I got sent this pre the meeting, via a lot of, difficult security, because everything with them has to be very well protected, like ideas are the most valuable currency on the planet in some ways. And so this original idea finally came to me, and it was a page and a half for what was going to be 9 episodes, about 6.5, 7 hours of story. And I got this page and a half, and I read it, and I was like, I don't know what to make of that. It was jumping periods. It was kind of sitcom meets kind of action, meets science fiction. And so I actually called up my friend Paul Bettany, who had, is Vision, because, it was WandaVision. And I just wanted to understand a little bit more about what it was. And I said, I've got this thing, Paul, can you just explain a little bit more what's going on? And he said, trust Kevin Feige. He said, it's going to be great, trust Kevin Feige. And I did trust Kevin Feige and the studio, and actually when the scripts came, they were great. And I did the meeting with Matt. But I think I did the meeting with Matt Shackman based on just that page and a half. I didn't get any scripts, I don't think.
Was your first meeting with the studio then, rather than?
No, the first meeting was with Matt, and we just got on immediately. Matt is a wonderful director. He's a theatre director, He ran the Geffen Playhouse in Los Angeles for over a decade, and he comes out of theatre, and he's got a long history in, television and film as an actor as well. So he's kind of a great director for me because I like to kind of take control of the visuals, and you feel a lot of confidence in him and the dramatic arc and the script and the storytelling and the hand. You feel in very safe hands with him, and so I think immediately, I just felt like this is going to be a good collaboration.
So that was WandaVision, which was your first Marvel TV show.
That's right, yeah.
Working with Matt, director of Fantastic Four, and that went well enough to get a call back. But when did you first get a call for this?
So then I carried on working with Matt on a couple of other productions. We did a couple of pilots, and we were actually prepping another film, another big science fiction film.
Oh, great.
And that sort of fell apart, and then we were in the middle of shooting a pilot, and he was like, I've got this call from Kevin, and they want to talk about Fantastic Four, and so we talked a little bit about it sort of in between, in the morning of a couple of shoot days, and then he was diving into it, and I just was like, good luck, it sounds great. But yeah, I think after WandaVision, I had a relationship with the studio. It was period, it was kind of, we were continuing some of the things. It has the family element. It has, when I met with Matt for WandaVision, he said to me, I want someone who can do action, comedy, science fiction, and drama. And he said it's a very short list.
Yeah, that's all cool.
So, I think this is a little bit similar. It is in a way, as far as the IPs go, in the Marvel universe, it is the family story. It's about the family. It's about a marriage. It's about bringing up a child into the world and what that, what comes with that whilst having, this responsibility. So I think there were connections there, and we'd been getting on so well that it just made sense that we did this together.
Great. Where were you when you got a phone call to say that you got the job?
That's a good question. I think it took a while to kind of throw it up, in that way that it does. I think it was over probably a couple of different locations that I finally.
There must be an exciting moment to get a phone call that you've just got big.
Actually, Matt came to see me at my house for tea, and he sat in my garden. He said, "I think you're good with Marvel. They want you to do this, and I want you to do it." So,
brilliant. Well done.
It's a nice moment.
And from there, what was the timeline of production of the film?
So it's quite long because we actually pushed a couple of times. So it ended up being, I did actually work out that from when I did I looked at my calendar and I worked out from when I did my first previs shot till when the film was released, it was almost 2 years.
Wow, that's a chunk of life.
Yeah, and that we weren't working all that time. There were down periods where, things stopped because the movie had pushed. Well, we figured some things out. But yeah, essentially it was a long prep period. Which had some benefits because, I got in early and started previs and really building, sequences. And so I had a lot of time to think about some of the complicated sequences and some of the methodology and the storyboarding, and so it was just sort of in the ether for a long time with us, which was great. It's a complicated movie, so more time was helpful.
There's a lot which happens in that film.
There's a lot.
A hell of a lot. Where do you start? Where do you start on day one when you get a film like this? Where do you start on day one in prep? Where do you begin referencing? Where do you begin looking for inspiration?
I started with the comic. Because I do like comics, and certain comics I've been interested in. This wasn't really one that I was super familiar with, so I wanted to know a little bit about the comic. And so I read, a kind of anthology, Fantastic Four, one of the kind of, big ones. And then from then, I think it really was clear to me that this was kind of a period film, this was like a retro future 1960 something, and that it was an alternate universe for Marvel because this takes place in a different. That's why there's no interaction with other characters, which is an amazing thing because you're not beholden to any other character or style that's come before. You're kind of creating a whole world. And so then it was kind of like world building. It's like, what is this? This is some version of retro future. We know that's very prevalent in the work of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and we want to respect that. But there's a lot of ways to thread that needle.
Yeah.
And so we started looking at a lot of, personally, I started looking at a lot of late 60s movies and a lot of space movies.
Cool.
and a lot of reference of New York in the late 60s and a lot of design around that period, which was all kind of informing the world and sort of, having conversations with the production designer and with Matt about how we were going to kind of create this kind of unique texture that we were looking for that wasn't a copy of, 1968, but it was infused with some of the spirit of 1968, the aesthetics, and then a sort of, our own thing within that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think you succeeded in doing that.
Thank you.
How long were you prepping it for? How long were you sort of before you started shooting?
Yeah, I think I started sort of in my own time a little bit with the optics because we made unique lenses for this film, and that takes a certain amount of time, and I knew I was going to do that, so that work started quite early. I think I came to England and had maybe like 13 weeks prep at Pinewood, but I'd already shot IMAX tests and lens tests, in LA before I did that.
When did the decision to go IMAX, where did that come from? Was that from you? Was that from a studio?
It came, I think, very much from me and from Matt initially, and was backed up by the studio. I mean, I think there was a lot of excitement around IMAX that was coming, amongst cinematographers and amongst filmmakers in general. And, I mean, I think most of us were dying to get our hands on large format. So, yeah, it was definitely around and just a great opportunity, a project of this scale to kind of work with IMAX, and they were interested. So we started to figure out what exactly that meant in terms of, aspect ratio and, camera platforms and, visual effects and all of the sort of science of it, really.
I was going to ask you shot, this is captured digitally, is that
Yeah,
correct?
so it's captured digitally. I think the amount of there's 2,150 visual effects shots, I think, in the film, and I think there's only 130 shots that are not visual effects, that are not touched by some way by visual effects. I mean, having said that, we did as much practical photography as possible. I mean, there are big sets, there are animatronics. We shot something whenever we could shoot real photography. We shot it, miniatures, all of that, but. Ultimately, there is a lot of digital visual effects, and I think combining celluloid and digital it would have been tricky given our timeline, because we had to finish the movie quite quickly. The visual effects finishing time was not actually that long, and so I think celluloid with scanning and with all of that would have been very difficult.
So how's that work with IMAX? I'm completely ignorant of this.
So IMAX, have certified cameras that, the film cameras and digital cameras. So with the 65mm. Digital camera is a certified IMAX camera, which is what we use.
Is that an Alexa 65?
It's an Alexa 65, yeah.
Has that had any special work done to it, or is it sort of...
Not really, no. Then it's really about kind of your aspect ratio and making sure that works for IMAX, and the resolution and the technical specs that they require.
Yeah. And you got that from Panavision, who also provided the lenses as well.
Yeah, we did a combination of ARRI and Panavision. ARRI for this Alexa 65s, which actually they still own all of the original legacy Alexa 65s, which is what we use for most of the movie. And then Panavision for the optics. Yeah, we had extensive kind of customized optics for the film.
Very cool. What were your sort of main set of lenses?
So the ultra panatars, which it's going to get quite technical for the non-cinematographers.
Yeah, we'll go quick on this one.
But we can sort of revisit some of that or skip through it. So yeah, ultra panatars are 1.3 times anamorphic lenses that cover 1.9 for IMAX, which was great. But I think they were not completely built for our movie. They were built, as a Panavision lens. But I did a lot of work to them. We kind of attacked them and sort of really modified them in several ways to kind of bring the period look.
Yeah.
And that involved, changing the flares, adding halation, adding softening, a bunch of different things, opening the iris up to make them faster. So, they really became kind of our own set. And we also did build a custom one-of-a-kind 29mm UP2, which was the widest angle, which we used extensively. And I think, did we make another one? No, that was the customized one. Yeah, that was the original build. So that was the sort of main set. But then for the 143, we have, I think, 85 shots that go into 143, which is the full IMAX screen. So you'll even just see it competing with the the railing here,
Yes,
and it opens
clipping
up.
onwards,
You know,
yeah.
as you go into Galactus's ship, we open up to 143, and we have, you know, about 60 or 65 shots there. And then when he lands in New York, we have about another 30 143 shots. Now that had to be spherical lenses, so we started off modifying vintage spherical lenses, and that didn't work very well. So we ended up completely building the wide-angle versions of those. They went from 18 mil, you know, 21, 29, 35 to I think maybe 40. Were all custom built. And then beyond that, we actually used some medium format original vintage glass, and we kind of just, you know, rehoused those and modified those. So we had a kind of complete set of spherical lenses as well, and they covered 143 even to the 18 mil. And that was really for the Galactus shots, you know, and the scale that we needed for him. And also because we had a whole plan with miniatures to kind of shoot Galactus as the miniature, and also to shoot the Excelsior spaceship as the miniature. And then we had, in addition to that, we took a set of super Baltar lenses, which are original 1960s glass.
Fantastic,
And we
yeah.
expanded those and rehoused those for the Alexa 65. So they covered the Alexa
wow,
65.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's so
So we found the original lenses, and Dan Sasaki at Panavision did that. He did all the work on the lenses. And that was for the kind of newsreel stuff. You know, all that sort of, you know, stuff that happens on the street and the news footage. We wanted that kind of gritty texture. We also shot a lot of 16 mil for that as well.
Brilliant. Did that end up in the
It's in there, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Excellent, that's fun.
Lots of it's in there, and lots of it was referenced. You know, if it wasn't that, then it was, you know, we were able to use that texture and kind of make sure our digital photography matched that 16 mil, because that was really, when Matt saw the test for that, he was like, that's what I want for that feel, that strand. So it's quite multi-format as a film, in the same way that WandaVision was, you know.
Yes. Yeah,
we're changing aspect ratios, we're changing formats, you know.
Great. I'd really like to talk about one sequence in the film, which is, and I don't know where you begin it and end it, but it's sort of 15 minutes of pure action of the Fantastic Four going into Galactus's ship, getting chased out and going through this sort of chase through space and through hyperspace and through a neutron star, and all the while Vanessa Kirby, Sue Storm, is giving birth to a child. I mean, it's an amazing sequence.
Yeah.
As I get a bit older, as I do bigger and bigger jobs, I sort of start to really start to understand the imagination and creativity which goes into creating a sequence like that as a whole, but also individually about how, as a DOP, you sort of try and figure out the light sources, the color, the quality of these lights.
Yeah.
So if we can just talk through that sequence and a few bullet points and moments of it.
It's an incredibly complicated sequence, which was entirely prevised, and the previs was very accurate. So I'll just start by saying that. And that process was hugely valuable to, I think, all of us to understand. You know, it's none of those even mini scenes are scenes that you could kind of turn up and figure out, you know. But I think, you know, once the Excelsior was an extraordinary set. The interior was a very large interior spaceship set, which was built on a gimbal at Pinewood. And, you know, I was very conscious that I wanted the space environments to kind of infuse the drama as you went through these different environments, you know, that it was really part of the story. So I wanted a lot of the light from space to kind of penetrate the Excelsior and be, you know, a kind of key light in a way for a lot of it. And so, you know, we talked about LED screens, we talked about, you know, possibly like doing that. Of course, nothing was really ever going to be ready enough in terms of what was outside the windows to do that probably anyway. But also, I don't think power-wise, the kind of light that I was trying to put into that ship was really, you know, leading me towards LED screens, and also the quality of color that I wanted to work with and the control over color. So effectively, that set was built on a gimbal, so could articulate, and then it was kind of housed in a sort of just so many LED lights. It was sort of everywhere you looked out of any of those windows, it was just wrapped with these huge structures, there was Vortex 8 fixtures that I used, which is an RGBW LED source that we all use a lot. But they were kind of built into these arrays, so it's almost like building a kind of an LED screen, but made out of vortexes. And then we mounted these on frames that could be adjusted, so they could be lifted up and they could be dragged along to different positions. And then I had full control of like every fixture in that. There's probably like over 500 of those. Fully control of those on the board. So I could kind of create these environments, these space environments in any color that I wanted with any kind of, pattern of movement. And then the ship itself was just full of practical lights. So, the electricians were in there, for weeks. And then the whole thing had to gimbal. And then we, in addition to that, sort of lighting-wise, I had these hard sources, these star sources, which were hard light, which were, moving sources, which kind of increased the animation of the spaceship as well. And that was done with a very bright sort of fixture on a Technocrane, so I could extend it and I could move that source around during a shot.
Was that like a Nanlux or something?
Yeah,
like
it was. It was very powerful Nanlux.
2.4V or 5K?
Yeah. So, that was sort of the ship, the interior. And then in terms of the imagination side of it, obviously watching a lot of space movies, I looked at a lot of NASA, and that's why I love being here, through the Science Museum. So I looked at a lot of NASA photography from the space missions. It's really, really kind of amazing photography, amazing quality, and they were very good photographers, and they documented everything. So that was a great source of reference. We watched the Hubble, not the Hubble, the James Webb Telescope movie at the IMAX theatre. They screened that for us, so that had a great amount of reference of, really stuff in space that we haven't seen before. So all those things were kind of feeding into my imagination. And then, I got in touch with, via some other people that had worked with him in the industry, a physicist who was based in California, who became a consultant. And I was able to talk to him about the quality of light and neutron stars.
So when he gets the neutron star, it looked a bit sort of like there's sort of warmth on the outside of it and a middle.
There's some real science in there, but there's also some artistic license for storytelling.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of ride that line, and so the professor was very helpful at kind of grounding me in the real physics. And actually, we talked to an astronaut as well a lot about, how do people move in zero gravity, all that sort of stuff. So it was really conceiving these different space environments, and then sort of looking at the journey, from the liftoff, into faster than light. They dock with the faster than light, and then trying to find a kind of color story in a way that kind of worked with the arc of the narrative.
Yep.
And so as far as the neutron star goes, technically it seems like neutron stars are a little cooler, especially at the core, where they go a little bluer.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'd run out of blue light at that point because I'd done faster than light in kind of...
And
I had to move out of that.
As well.
So I don't know how scientifically correct that particular golden light is. But the professor gave me a bit of leeway, and he said, I think you're okay with that. But even the tractor beam, that they're pulled up in was something that I consulted with him about.
Yep.
So there's a lot of real science in there. There's a lot of research. And then there's a lot of complex things in terms of the zero gravity. The build of the spaceship had to allow for a lot of wire work because that was all done practically initially, although, there was some CG takeover and some replacement. We were hanging people on wires in that spaceship, moving them around.
And then these people are going to act as well, and they've got to
act,
give birth and do all that kind of stuff. That's a real hard juggle.
So the spaceship came apart in 13 places. We had to have a part that came out, and it was organized as per shot, the access we needed for cameras, and then to move the wires. And we had all these sort of concealed places where we could travel the wires, and we did as much practical photography as possible. And then the tractor beam, they get sucked up into the ship. And then you get into the Galactus world, which is a kind of a hard scale to intellectualize because he's eating
big,
planets,
right? And
right?
he's really, really big.
It's enormous.
But he feels enormous and he feels terrifying on this screen as well.
Yeah, so that was the whole. That's why partly why I wanted this to happen in IMAX, because I wanted people to see what we did with that scale. But yeah, it's so big that to think about how light would operate in that environment was quite difficult, and it was quite difficult to film and to get find a methodology which we felt really would feel realistic, because I think one of Matt's sort of this movie was spectacle, but it was also realism. We wanted it to feel the CG. We really wanted it to feel real.
Yeah.
And so it was always kind of like, how do you walk into a really dark environment, which is an environment that is literally consuming planets the size of Earth? How do you light that?
Yeah. How do you light it which feels grounded?
Yeah, and how do you then have characters move through it?
Yeah.
And then encounter this character at the end and how do you work with scale of a human versus scale of the 800-foot space god? But there were a lot of issues there that we had to work through, and then the escape, and then the birth of the baby, and now at this point you've got Silver Surfer, CG character. You've got Ben as a CG character. You've got a real babies. Matt likes to do everything real if possible. Then you've got CG babies where the real babies can't work. People on wires and zero gravity, and a woman giving birth in the middle of a neutron star.
It's a lot to shoot. It's a lot of stuff going on.
But that's kind of the sequence in brief, really.
Do you, once you finish shooting a couple of months of that sort of sequence, and then you have a scene with a couple of people in someone's apartment talking about, sort of Sue Storm and the Human Torch talking about something there, do you breathe a sigh of relief? Do you go, oh, I know what this looks like?
I mean, you do, but I have to be honest, that set kind of stayed around for a long time because, whilst you're editing, you need little pieces, and, it was also split up between first and second unit, so there were certain things that they did. So, that set was around for a long time. And I don't know that I even in additional photography we shot on that set, so it wasn't finished until the movie was finished shooting. But yeah, you breathe a sigh of relief, and I think the other thing about that sequence is it all ends with the birth. So you have to bring it back to a very human place. After all that, that action, that science fiction, that space, that spectacle. It's ultimately about this moment.
And then are they back in by Earth? Because the
idea is they enter the Earth's atmosphere as the baby is born, so hence you have the light from
nice,
the sun.
clean white light.
Exactly.
Very hard, a bit clippy, feels really real, feels really grounded.
Exactly,
Yeah, great. Put a nice little end of a sentence. But the very beginning of it as well, I really like that red wash when they first get to Galactus' ship with the sort of scanning beam.
Yeah.
How did you?
That was a really interesting sort of problem that came up. As I'd worked a lot with kind of projected light, and I wasn't really confident that I could do anything that would be satisfactory for that. With any of the tools that I knew about, and then I sort of started thinking about lasers, and it was like, well, you can't use lasers around the actors, and it's got to fire at Vanessa Kirby, like into her eye, basically. So it has to be safe. So I started to sort of talk with a couple of sort of specialists, kind of, and we ended up working with Marshmallow Laser Fest, who are these kind of specialist kind of light installers, and we kind of worked with them to kind of come up with basically a special sort of process to make that kind of beam. So I sort of did the tractor bit, the red bit, and then we used a 50 kilowatt projector to and they did a sort of customized effect for that traveling beam. So that was really interesting, and it was very specific sort of detail that we picked out. But the red was, you asked about reference. The red was very particular. I wanted to have this sort of Stanley Kubrick red from 2001, and that was quite hard to achieve on digital. So that also took a lot of work in terms of the color science.
Really tricky.
And anyone who's tried to shoot digital on film or red on film or digital know that it's challenging color. But that Kubrick red was like really important to me, and I was happy with it in the end.
I think I saw a number of 2001 references tucked away. There's quite a few little references tucked away in that film, I think.
It's an important, very important reference for me on this film. And interestingly, Chevalier was my previous film, and that was, the Barry Lyndon was one of the key references. So I've been slightly back-to-back Kubrick as a big inspiration on the last two.
I love the color in that entire sequence. I must say, there's the sort of both the imagination of it and the execution of it. I thought it was a fantastic looking sequence. Good. I guess I want to ask you. I don't know how much time we've got left. I want to ask you about working with your VFX supervisor. Scott Stodick.
Yeah,
right?
Stockdyke.
Stockdyke. Thank you very much indeed. Have you ever worked with him before?
I hadn't worked with Scott. No. It was a really great collaboration. I think he did incredible work, and it was really not easy work, because I think trying to get that as much kind of photographic realism as possible, and working with all this real photography that we'd done, which creates in some ways more challenges, because you're trying to blend that with CG work. Was incredibly difficult. And I think very early on, I brought Scott into the IMAX lens tests and all my lens tests, so we'd watch the lens test projected together, and I'm really grateful he really honored the optics. Right at the beginning, I saw a couple of shots, and I just said to Scott, like, I don't know who's doing these, but like they need to look at the lens, the grids, and like make sure they're really honoring the optics, because it doesn't feel like our photography. And after that, I never had to say that again. Good. In fact, there were a couple of shots where I had to like back off my optics because they were so broken down, some of the longer lenses that I was using. The Silver Surfer like kind of looked too soft, and I was like, I want her to be sharper. And he was like, well, that's your lens, So we had to kind of sharpen a little bit. But he was incredibly diligent about managing. You've seen the list of visual effects artists, that he's having to look at the work of all those different vendors and track what they're doing. I think bringing him into the lens, the optics early was really helpful. And the other thing was bring him into the color science, because the color science was kind of in place, before we started shooting. So I was able to pass that on to him. So it meant that all the kind of visual effects artists could look at, any image with with my color applied to it, and understand kind of what I was doing lighting wise, or if they were replicating, areas of set extension and they had the data from my lighting console, or my color palette, they could actually honor that. And so that was huge as well. So it really was a sort of like an intense collaboration, as in the same way that it is with the production designer. It's just sort of you're in each other's lives, completely every day for the entire process. But yeah, it was really great working with him.
The VFX only shots, there's not that many of them. VFX only shots. How involved were you with those? I assume completely.
Well, interestingly, like looking at that end sequence, it's almost shot for shot the previs. There's very, very few shots where that we didn't design, that I didn't design with Matt in the previs for the end sequence. And I think for the space berth, it's kind of the same. In fact, the space berth is probably even more accurate. There's certain things that happen once the film's been edited, where people have ideas about things that should change, and there's test screenings, all the rest of it. So there was additional photography, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because you're no longer beholden to. So there's like one shot, which I just know, and when I saw it, I was like, what's that shot? It's got like 2 zooms in it. Like I didn't do that, so that was one I didn't do. But there's very few, actually. It's really like my hand is all over almost every frame,
Yeah. I guess for me, with those sort of VFX only shots, VFX heavy shots, you're not beholden to the physics that you are normally. You're not beholden to moving the camera and doing that. You can do whatever you want. I get quite scared of it.
It's very dangerous.
I get sort of like, I get a bit overwhelmed by it, because you're not helping.
I think also that if it's there's amazing visual effects artists that we work with, but the bottom line is they don't think necessarily like a cinematographer thinks. So if they're designing that shot, it just will have a different flavor to what I would do with the camera, and that just comes out of what we've been doing for 25 years or whatever. You have a very particular way of moving the camera, and of lens choice and all those things, and even when the shot should begin and end, so I think they're faced with the task of we've got to fill this gap, and we've got to tell this story in one shot. It's not always easy. But I think there's not that many of those shots in this movie, which I'm very pleased about.
Yeah,
and that's also like credit to Matt, who insisted on me being there. because as director, he was, you know, and actually our visual effects team who were like, we want Jess to be in the previs meetings, even if we're not shooting for months, you know, and the storyboard process, which, you know, I think following Wonder as well, Matt and I had a real dialogue, and we had relationships with storyboard artists that we'd work with together. So that's a really interesting, you know, process. And I love sort of sitting with him, you know, in previs and designing shots, you know, because we can really figure out, you know, like what the best way to tell the story is, you know.
What is next? What's next for you? What would you like to do next? Would you like to do another superhero movie, or would you like to do something small and contained and you sort of emotional, people in a room?
I think it's scale irrelevant. It's more about, you know, what is the project, like, you know, what is the story, what kind of challenges does it bring, what kind of, you know, world can I create, you know, that I haven't quite done before, and keep reinventing and keep sort of challenging myself to come up with new things.
Who wants to ask a question? Anyone? Hands up? Anyone? Is that the microphone, Duncan, for the questions?
That is a microphone.
Okay.
I don't have any that was microphone.
Oh, people out there.
I know.
Is that something? I just wondered if you could go back to any point in your career and give yourself some advice, when would it be and what would you say?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, someone gave me the best bit of advice that I've ever had, which was, you know, to stay in it and to finish, you know, the most difficult movie that I've ever made, which, you know, was, I think, a great piece of advice because, you know, it's not always easy. And, you know, you don't win by walking away, you know. And I think that process of going through, like, even a really difficult project and coming to the end of it and actually doing work that you're proud of is kind of one of the big challenges, you know, because there's always like things that are really, really, you know, difficult to negotiate, whether it's, you know, on a character basis or a technical basis. And you've kind of got to be quite resilient, really. So I think if you can learn that through just kind of committing to, you know, finishing what you start and doing the best you can, you know, on any day, and also kind of just letting yourself accept that it's going to be sometimes very hard. That was a really good piece of advice for me. Yeah.
Congratulations for this fantastic work. And my question is just when you compose or frame for IMAX, what considerations or what do you consider as like, you know, how to compose for IMAX, you know, just because people might not even be able to see the whole image. It's just too huge. Sorry for, it's just my echo. I can't.
No, that's a good question. I think, you know, it's there were some sort of ideas about what you should and shouldn't do for IMAX that are kind of, you know, you'll hear. I think, you know, you do have to play a little bit towards the center of the screen. And obviously it depends where you're sitting in the theater, how you experience it, probably more than a normal theater. The difficult thing, I think, is, you know, when you're composing for IMAX, you're also composing for other formats because, you know, the movie has to work in multiple formats. And, you know, this movie was finished in 7 different formats. You know, aspect ratio wise, you know, we had 2:3:9 for standard theatrical, 1:9 for IMAX, and then 1:9 plus 1:4 for, you know, expanded IMAX like you saw on the extra shots here. So, you know, even when you're doing something that you know is going to open up to 1:4, that's only like 45 theaters in the world that do that. So, you know, I focused on the 1:9 in many ways. And, you know, on a technical level, you know, I put the 2:4:0 kind of in the middle of the 1:9 because then I actually didn't have to recompose that much for the 2:4:0. It just kind of worked quite nicely like that. But yeah, it's difficult. I don't think, I ever felt like putting things quite on the edge of the frame as much as I would if I was just doing a 2:40 movie. I think you're playing with space in a slightly different way. But you start to play with perspective in a very interesting way, and that's something that's really exciting about the format. Is I feel like optically you're in a different perspective, but it's a little bit more like working with a medium format camera, I suppose. If you've ever done that, probably good practice to do a bit of that if you want to shoot IMAX. And lens-wise, I think you do tend to stick with a more middle range. Although we played the wide angles a lot here, but then that was also particular to the Alexa 65. I think if you're shooting like a 15 perf IMAX camera, you're into a slightly different situation.
I think there's another question up over there.
Me personally, as a young cinematographer, I've never done visual effects, and definitely not to this level. So I was wondering, from your perspective, if you were to advise me or other people like me who have never had that experience, what would be your advice in terms of approach when working with the visual effects team, with the director, and having that imagination to light and shoot for something that you can't see in the moment?
Yeah, I think what's become interesting is, I think visual effects has become very, very sophisticated in the sense that there was a time when, you had to light blue and green screens to kind of quite a high level, and you got a lot of light pollution. And, I think going back to sort of when I did Ghost in the Shell, which was, a heavy VFX movie, working with Guillaume Richeron, who's an amazing visual effects supervisor, he just sort of said to me, like, I want you to light, visual effects shots like you'd like shots in a set. Don't compromise. We can solve, a lot of the problems. Like we can roto, we can matte, we can difference matte. There's ways of them creatively getting around you compromising your photography. So I think you want to, it's a collaboration. You have to work together. You have to deliver images that are going to be, functional for them. But I think it's very important to have the conversations around when you're being asked to do something, like understand why you're being asked to do something. And, the rules are only the rules until you find a way of breaking the rules, and they got a lot of computing power behind them now. So I think if you can liberate your cinematography, within the kind of the budget that you have and the parameters that you have, even if you're doing simple process work, I would really sort of encourage you to kind of, try and light well, and light how you want the scene to be and how you want the faces to be, and just make sure you're giving the visual effects supervisors what they need, but also kind of honoring your cinematography and just keep that dialogue going. Because ultimately, like, the shots are only going to look better if your cinematography is better. It's very important, and the good supervisors understand that. So try and work with good supervisors and try and kind of just build that trust and kind of push the boundaries a little bit to find out what works and what doesn't. As well.
I think it's the key is for concept, conceptually, what are you trying to achieve? And I think that's what's so great about your work here. Is that's the real
yeah, exactly. You want to lead from that, and I think sort of try and solve the problems, and that was a lot about each of these characters that we had to kind of had big digital elements. We had to, each character was kind of unique in the way in which we approached them to get the best result, and that's in many ways, well, for a director like Matt, and I think he's right, it's about getting the best performance. How do you get the most humanity out of a digital character? It's not always the same process, and so we went through a lot of methodologies to actually figure out for each character how we could get as much real humanity and performance from those fantastic actors as we could, so yeah.
One question over here. Does this work? Oh, g'day. Question over here. Just what's sort of your takeaway from this? Like, if you wish what did you wish you knew at the beginning that you know now of the process and working, whether technical or, creative?
I think there's a very sort of there's a very fast finish on these movies, and I don't know that I could have done anything differently to make that easier. But a lot of people said to me, like, this is going to be really tough at the end. And it was really tough at the end because the timeline was really tough. And that's, of course, driven by a lot of things that, we don't control. So ultimately, I think the more you do up front, the better, because, when you get to additional photography and then you get to like a fast finish, you want to have everything in as good a place as you can. So I would just sort of go like more and more detailed prep, as much as you can do, so, to put yourself in a good place that you don't have to kind of, work too hard with your images in the end, because when you're trying to combine, 5 different plates, like a New York City background plate, a set on Pinewood, a digital character with, a live baby shot against, all these. It's not like you can necessarily control doing it differently, but just the more you know what that end process is, the more you can maybe prepare and sort of, just make each element better, But yeah, it's always going to be tricky, that ending.
Last question here.
Hey, thank you, Shaolin from the London Film School. So thank you for bringing these fantastic images. And in the film, there's some shots I assumed before their first launch to the space. I assume it's done by 16mm film, and I can see it's like scaled in a like mailbox mode. So actually smaller than the normal IMAX image. And it's perfectly fine for this gigantic screen. It gives us a retro feeling and tells apart from the normal timeline because it's a memory part. But when you distribute this film to some other platforms, especially online platforms, the truth is people are going to watch it on like tablet or even phones. Do you think there will be like, would you consider to rescale it to adapt different platforms, different devices, or?
I mean, yeah, we do a lot of work for each format, to make it the best viewing experience in each format that we can. So, whether it's 3D IMAX, standard theatrical, all everything, and there's a lot of stuff that happens with the framing where you make sort of very subtle adjustments. Like I would do a framing pass for the 240 version, a framing pass for the IMAX 1.9 version, a framing pass for the 1.4.3 version. So we are making those micro adjustments to try and make it as good as it can be in each format. And it is challenging actually with all the different formats and the multiple kind of considerations as to how to make it optimized. But I think, with the sort of tablet viewing and the phone viewing, whilst it's inevitable, what I'm very happy about is that we all watched this movie in an IMAX theater. And, I think that's one of the excitements about IMAX is, as inevitably people watch on smaller platforms, we want cinema to be as big as possible, and to be a full immersive experience. And I think this kind of a theater is like, really important in doing that.
Thank you so much.